So we can't hear you, Nick. We can hear Vox's background noise. You can probably hear me chewing on my crunchy chips.
You know, it will.
I'll just take over. So this is In Time. My name is Christopher Mowdy. I'm sometimes a co-host, and I am here with the leader of the In Time, Overtime, Off Time cult, Nick Suter, who's not wearing his Nick Suter $400 suit, but with our other co-host, Vox. And every once in a while, we like to roll my man Joe into the fold so that we have more variety of opinion, because Joe is smarter than all of us and has a little bit of a different take on most events. So we're going to get argumentative and we're going to disagree, but we're going to disagree without being disagreeable. It's not going to be a problem, right, everyone?
Sure.
No, I don't agree to that.
Oh, now your fucking mic works.
That
Right? What the fuck? I thought I was vamping, brother.
You know, I'll never get used to hearing, even though I've been here now for 15 something years, maybe even longer than that. I'll never get used to hearing people call crisps chips. Right? Chips are what you call French fries. Crisps are what you call potato chips. I never get used to it. I'll say, can I get some chips? People hand me a bag of, powdered, flavored cornstarch, in a colorful plastic bag. I'm like, that's not what I asked for. Anyway.
Well, okay. So Vox, you were talking about Cruz. What did Cruz do today?
Oh God! So the notable Cruz, Ted Cruz, right? The man who got bitch slapped, in 2016 by Donald Trump, the former president of the United States of America. That sounds so good, doesn't it? The former president of the United States of America, Donald Trump.
It's still a greater honorific than I think he deserves, but yeah.
Oh,
okay.
It's like magic in my ears, right? Anyway, so, the virtue signaling, gas bag Ted Cruz is in confirmation hearing with Pete Buttigieg, transportation secretary. And, what we learned on the 2020 campaign trail is if there's one person that you don't try to get something over their head, right, it's Pete Buttigieg, right? The man's like Ken Jennings, right? He should go on, Jeopardy and just beat everybody up. I mean, he's just brilliant, So Ted Cruz is up there and he goes, well, Pete, the first day in office, Joe Biden talks about bringing everybody together, but on his first day, he cancels permits for the Keystone Pipeline. He goes on and on about how it's gonna kill union jobs, right? 1,200 union jobs, right? Now, first of all, Ted Cruz doesn't give a flying fuck about union jobs, right? Ted Cruz had his way. Everybody be working in a sweatshop for $2 an hour. Right, and there'd be about 5,000 people living in the clouds. Right, think Elysium. That's his kind of capitalism. Right? Putting that aside, the virtue signaling, union jobs. Oh my God, union jobs. No, why did Joe Biden kill union jobs in the middle of an economic recession? Of course, Buttigieg turns to him and says, "Well, we made a promise to the American people that we would cancel the Keystone Pipeline, and we did." But don't worry, because we are going to employ millions of Americans with good, high-paying, renewable energy jobs. And of course, Ted Cruz goes, and, it was only about a 15-second exchange, right? But the amount of, fodder in there, right, from Ted Cruz complaining about union jobs being lost to still towing this line and everything like that, trying to go after, quite arguably, the smartest man in Washington now. And you just can't make this shit up. It's like perfect political theater.
Yeah,
Ted Cruz is a smart cat, though. I mean, he's no slouch. As snivelly and ultimately cartoonishly supervillain as he is.
Yeah.
You know what
Well,
I mean? He's
I
a
tell
smart
you-
cat. You
I'll
can't.
tell you what Ted Cruz.
I'm
reminds
not
me
accepting.
of.
I'm not granting. I'm not granting the he's not a smart guy narrative.
Oh, no. I'm not saying he's not a smart guy. I'm saying Pete Buttigieg is probably arguably the smartest person in Washington at the
And
moment.
he's also being outclassed. Even
Right.
in
Yeah.
addition to being outsmarted, he's being
Well,
outclassed.
you know, especially too when it comes to it, is like Rock said, you know, Ted Cruz doesn't give a fuck about 1,200 union jobs. I mean, the thing that, and here's the thing with any of these like dying industries, certainly we need to care about the people that will lose their job, and we need to have a plan to try to make it as soft as landing as possible for all of them. But when the Republicans are doing stuff that help offshore jobs to other countries, they don't give a fuck about those jobs long.
Precisely.
It's
Well, and of course,
they only ever do it when it's a prop. When they can try to hold it over. Oh, the Democrats are killing these jobs, but they'll ignore the ones that are coming in. But I mean, like no one's crying for the boot black. No one's crying for the gas lamp guy, lighter, because those jobs.
yeah, the carriage maker.
Right.
And at the end of the exchange, he says something that just like smacks you in the head. He goes, Joe Biden has already shown he is out of accord with a majority of Americans, right? So quick bit of research, right? 77%, right? That's a big number because that includes a large group of Republicans. 77% of Americans support the expansion of renewable resources and the moving away from fossil fuels. 77% of Americans. All right, that's a huge number. So obviously the Biden campaign, who was elected by 80 million people, right, is obviously in lockstep with the American people. On top of that, right, renewable energy jobs across the board are the fastest growing blue-collar job in America, with expected growth over the next 5 years of over 100% in solar installer and wind turbine technician. And they pay on average $8 more an hour than fossil fuel industry jobs. Right. So what Mr. Cruz is actually saying, because he is the number one recipient of oil money in Congress, the number one recipient. He is saying, I care more about the swamp, right? I'm going to borrow Trump's words, right? I'm going to turn it around on him, right? He cares more about the swamp and lobbyists and corporate interests than American citizens and their jobs.
Well, and to change topic just a little bit, the jobs thing has always been, I mean, one of the more recent ones was bank tellers, of course, because the bank tellers really objected to ATMs. And they said, ATMs are going to put every bank teller in the country out of business. No, it didn't. It had a small impact on some of them, but most of them ended up moving in or doing some other job for the bank. And because the banks were getting more business, because they could get more people through, the banks actually needed more people to work for them. So you end up actually employing more people in the long run when you do. It's a pain in the ass. Everybody wants to just have a job that they're going to stick with for the rest of their lives. And, there's consistency and they can grow in that sector. I get that. But the reality is, you know what, especially if this is from the same crew that says, well, the people who are for social services don't properly understand the value of good, honest work. Well, then the work that you can get, especially if it's going to be paying more, if we're moving to a different industry, they just don't like the industry, which is hilarious because it's a good. I mean, it's not like somebody's asking them to move into a disreputable industry. They're not being asked to do something unethical or elite. It's fucking renewable energy. It's like, ooh, but it's
well, a lot of stuff has come out of this pandemic. You know me, I always look for silver linings, right? And so one of the things, and I think this is tied into what you're saying, Nick, one of the things that's come out of the pandemic is the realization.
Drinking from a 2-liter Mountain Dew right now?
Oh my God!
You know what? Vox is speaking, so we're gonna mute Mowdy because Vox is speaking, and I think he's being very rude to Vox, and that's not
Did
going to
you
happen.
just mute me?
I don't know what happened. This is a very complex control system. I really don't understand how it works. And, I want you to give me this is a brand new. It's a whole new thing. I don't know how it works. I'll have to excuse me.
Oh boy! All right.
Oh goodness.
Can we let Vox finish?
Well, now I need to say, I need to introduce you to Tazo tea, right? And I drink a blend of English breakfast combined with green ginger tea, and I mix the two together. I cold brew it for about 24 hours, and I drink that whenever I'm thirsty, and it will do wonders for almost all aspects of your health. So there you go. Maybe we can get a little bit of advertising money from Tazo. Sponsored by.
Call their asses up. Yeah.
Well,
Let's.
I want to address something that Nick just said a minute ago. Comparison. The other one is with automation jobs. Everyone's like, "Oh, automation is going to take away all the jobs." No, it isn't. I mean, it's going to displace jobs for sure, but it creates new jobs. Like that's what my company does. We do automation. I'm hiring people. I struggle to find competent people because there aren't enough people trained in it that are native citizens, but or immigrants. But I can easily import people if I wanted. But the thing is that it changes the nature. So what ends up happening is you have fewer factory floor workers, but now you need more electricians and more mechanics and more programmers and all this kind of stuff. So it changes the nature of business and the nature of manufacturing. But overall, maybe you have a little bit of job loss overall, but not much. And these jobs pay a lot more than factory work.
Well, let's talk a moment about what Schumpeter calls creative destruction. Okay, so it is true that automation will replace jobs, right? It'll get rid of a lot of truck driving jobs, right? When we get automated cars, get rid of a lot of factory workers, streamlining. I mean, look what happened when, the assembly line first came out with Henry Ford, right? A lot of people got displaced, right? Like capitalism relies on this principle of creative destruction. So how do you combat the creative destruction tendencies of capitalism, right? Because as Nick pointed out, was somebody, sorry, not Nick, Sirius pointed out, when the car was invented, right, we didn't cry for carriage makers, right? When modern medicine started making people live longer, right, we didn't cry, about, morticians and things, maybe losing their jobs, right? That's just the way capitalism works. We move forward because we want better stuff. So we have to recognize that we need to live in a different kind of society, because right now, when we talk about jobs, we are talking about people in what I call cog jobs, right? Pull the lever, press the button, input the information, right? Drone jobs. We need to also place the same value on art and social sciences. And when we do that, when we change the way we value things, and we put value on people who paint and sing and dance and look into social elements in the humanities, you will see an explosion of jobs, because there's just large groups of people that will never be able to fulfill any kind of potential in a cubicle type environment. They're not built that way, right? But you put those people into a creative environment, and they will make the world a more beautiful and peaceful place. But we don't value those things, right? We need to value those things.
Well, and on top of, I agree with everything you just said. On top of it, the people that are kind of like being alarmist about automation, they act like, next Tuesday all the jobs are going to be gone, and that's so not true. I mean, there's tons of stuff in this country that aren't even close to automated to begin with, like and need to be upgraded even beyond the automation level. Just like there's ancient processes that are horribly inefficient, or they have terrible carbon footprints, and don't put out near the output that they could. That need to, and there's lots of waste that needs to be done. So we're so far away from this future that people think that where there's not going to be any jobs left. I mean, just dealing with the infrastructure. Think of how much we don't fix the infrastructure of the country that needs to get done.
Absolutely.
Probably a couple million people.
I support a $20 trillion investment tomorrow in American infrastructure. People say, oh my God, Kat, you want to add $20 trillion to the deficit? Yup, I sure do. And you want to know what? The only thing that adding $20 trillion to the deficit will do, by the way, audience, you are free to fact check me. I am a modern monetary theorist, so go look up Bill Mitchell, right? The only thing that adding $20 trillion to the deficit will do is increase GDP, decrease unemployment, and increase the standard of living for all Americans and large chunks of the third world. Let's spend some money, boys.
Well, and also you think about just say infrastructure. I saw this thing is that how many millions of bottles of bottled water we buy every year. Why do we do that? The water coming out of our tap doesn't taste very good. Now the water coming out of the water treatment plant tastes fine, but if the pipes that get the water to us are old, some of them are still made of wood. And there's all sorts of stuff growing in there. Now, just replacing all the I figured out what we spend on bottled water in 10 years would pay to replace all the old piping infrastructure. In which case, then we wouldn't need to buy. No one would need to buy bottled water. I mean, you might buy a reusable bottle that you could carry around, to keep yourself hydrated, but you wouldn't need to go to a store and buy a bottle made of plastic that's ruining the.
By the way, I have absolutely no problem bankrupting Nestle as a corporation. None whatsoever.
Amen.
Vark, Nick,
yes,
and Chris, you've been very quiet. You got any input here?
I only that every time you mention Nestle, I bristle just a little bit because I have a friend named Nesty. You've been taking it out on him, his name, and I don't get that. But you're very hostile towards him.
And also, Nestle is a very deep contributor to flavor, taste, and smell science. So let's let them exist at the multi-billion-dollar level for a little while longer, please.
Well, just without selling tons of water, they sell other products.
Yeah, look, I have no problem with them selling, really bad ice cream and chocolate, right? That is not really chocolate. It's just actually corn syrup and cocoa powder pressed into a square, right? Y'all have never actually tasted real chocolate in America, I promise you.
Actually, yes, because we can get Swiss chocolate here.
Yeah, oh my God.
But we have to get it. Yeah, we definitely have to get it imported. But I mean, I've had really, really good Belgian chocolate, and it's completely different.
My God.
It's the butterfat content is what makes American chocolate American. It's what makes Hershey. You know what I mean? Nestle's a little bit less, but I mean, Hershey is essentially chocolate flavored butterfat.
Yeah. It's so if you ever pick up is Mars bars, they're owned by Nestle, I think, right? They make Hershey. Is Hershey owned by Nestle? M&M's, things like that. So basically, if you look at the and I know this is just the way this show goes, right? We're going to bounce back and forth, folks. So you're just first now listening to us live. But if you look at the pack of a bag of M&M's, right? First ingredient is soybean oil, right? And then the next is high fructose corn syrup. And then the next will be, for some strange reason, corn syrup, right? So your first three ingredients, which make up 90% of what you're putting in your mouth. Soybean oil, high fructose corn syrup, right? The next to the 10% is going to be preservatives and artificial flavors, artificial colors, and cocoa, right? Which, cocoa that we get here is basically, the droppings of the good cocoa that Europeans buy. So there's your chocolate bar.
Wait, say the last part again. I missed that. What's the droppings of European stuff?
Oh, so cocoa powder is crushed up cocoa beans. right?
Well,
But
not milk,
the
but yeah.
the cocoa that we get, right, is not high grade premium quality, Peruvian sourced cocoa or cacao, right? It's just not, right? It's just the crap. It's pure crap.
No, I mean,
Do yourself a favor, buy some Belgian chocolate, just a bar of dark chocolate from
I hate
like a
dark
Belgian chocolate
chocolate.
sauce.
Disgusting.
Oh, it's like orgasmic. Yeah, but
No.
it's
Swiss-
different, as Maddie pointed out, right? Good
Swiss-
Belgian chocolte, good chocolate from Denmark or Holland.
I've had it. I've had it. My wife travels, and she used to bring back stuff from Denmark, from Belgium, from Switzerland. To me, I like Swiss chocolate the best.
We
So
just
I was gonna
lost.
say there's a middle ground to be struck between a dark chocolate to prove the point of how good a quality of cacao is versus like a good milk chocolate, right? A good milk chocolate still doesn't taste like a fucking Hershey bar. Hershey bar is just like that almost proves the point, because a Hershey bar claims to be milk chocolate. But when you have an actual bar that is like a milk chocolate from a chocolatier, Belgian genuine quality cacao, or Swiss, right, Joe, to your point, that's just a different experience. It's just a different goddamn experience. But a point that I wanted to a point that I think that you made that I think kind of didn't get addressed real well, Joe, is I think that you were saying something about getting back to automation. When there should there be a shift in the landscape of what people are doing, that doesn't mean there will be a decrease in jobs. That doesn't mean there will be a decrease in things to do.
Right.
Which means that there won't be a decrease in jobs, right?
Basically,
was I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
I totally enjoyed. I'm charmed by that. Now, I think the problem is these changes occur so infrequently that people get like dug in like a tick to the way things are, such that when change has to happen 20, 30, a generation or two later, when your family's foundation has been built on coal, whatever, right? Anything that's going to be not necessarily a fruitful job in the next 20, 30 years. In the next 100 years, I think that job markets are going to be so nimble, things are going to change so frequently that even when you specialize in something, it's not like you're perpetually going to be doing like a factory line kind of gig where it's the same shit the whole time. Like Maybelline. Okay, this is a different color lipstick we're squirting into the fucking tube. You know what I mean? It's going to be a different ball of wax.
And to your point, both food and
this is your point, motherfucker.
well, to what you just said, though, both food and cosmetics are actually two of the most nimble industries currently, because tastes change rapidly. Both in our aesthetics change and our desire for different food things change all the time. So I know I started off, my first job was in aroma chemical, doing process engineering and process controls, and I interviewed over at the flavor side of that same company, and they were talking about how literally like every year they change over hardware, because what was in last year is not what's in this year. Remember, like 2 years ago, pretzel bread was all the rage, and everything was pretzel bread. And some 15 years ago was balsamic vinegar, and 10 years ago was something else. There's this constant like rotation of what's the in flavors, what's the in smells and tastes, and again how we
like 7 years ago, you knew that something changed in flavor chemistry that allowed the jalapeno flavor to be more realistic, because everything was jalapeno. Cheese curls, jalapeno flavored cheese curls, jalapeno flavored. It's like all of a sudden somebody had the Gnostic key. They're like, oh, well, this is the chemical formula if you want shit to taste like actual jalapeno. And then like everyone was like, I'll take that.
Exactly. So as a result, and I do think you're right that other industries, well, pharmaceutical, it's starting to be because, as there's kind of a up and coming revolution in oncology, and I know this. My wife works in oncology, and then the new series of drugs that are coming out from all the people who do oncology drugs, they're way better than the old ones. The only thing is right now, because they're so expensive, because they're new, that they're not the first line treatments. They're the second line. If the first line treatments don't work, or sometimes even the second line treatments don't work, then they try you on these new ones. And again, that's another thing we can get to about the way the financing of our healthcare system. But but the new, some of these new ones, like even for people in stage 3 and stage 4, that the way that they work are completely different, and they block the basically reproduction of the cancer cells in the body, because certain cancers reproduce almost the way viruses do, and they block certain protein that the cancer needs to survive and spread, or they'll block some pathway into a cell or something like this. Some of them are based on enzymic or even biological keys, like the RNA keys. So that's why like this whole new vaccines, these vaccines for COVID, that are based on messenger RNA, they're using the same techniques in oncology. And eventually those will become, there'll be more of those, and you're going to see these quick turnaround things, because there's way fewer side effects, so they don't need to be tested as long. There's less, there's fewer problems, and they're just really coming with a whole bunch of new treatments for all sorts of things that were untreatable up till today.
So all of this to say, pharmaceuticals as well as cosmetics and other industries like flavor industries have to be nimble. Like they're currently in real time as nimble as likely things that seem sluggish, like factory work or truck driving, transportation and things like that. Things that are sluggish now will seem as nimble in the future as these cosmetics and pharmaceutical companies seem now. Right. Like as easy as they were able to swap out what they're squirting into whatever fucking mold they built, because it's a new mold, will be just kind of the same, the way that we were just modularize the fucking future of everything, right?
So how often do we double our knowledge? Last I checked, it was like every 13 months, but that was like 3 or 4 years ago. And it's going up quickly. But if you take a look at, so it seems to me everyone's going to have to, on some level, specialize a bit more. That's, as our knowledge grows, the human capacity for how much we can know is still reasonably limited. But the number of fields in which you can work grows also.
Well, and that's the reason why there'll be more jobs, because, as you said, as more people have to specialize, there'll be too much knowledge that no one person's going to be able to handle it all, and that they're going to have to, there'll just be more people to do fewer things.
it'll force like a certain engineering and scientific literacy.
Yes.
Like bump up of the civilization. Like it'll almost force it to happen. Like if you want to maintain jobs, right? And I'm sure that there will still be a sector of people that don't need that won't be, they won't be boats that are risen by that tide. I don't know if that analogy makes sense.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Right. I'm sure that there will still be a sector that doesn't benefit from that. But there will be a certain part of the sector that will be like, I don't know if smarter, I want to say smarter, but that's not the right word. Like more
educated. I mean, the education is going to take longer.
Yeah.
And it is going to have to happen. Basically, if the United States doesn't make some major strides in the next 10 to 15 years, we will lose our economic dominance completely. As I mentioned before, I struggle to find competent people that do automation that are already here in the United States, whether they were born here or immigrated here. But if I wanted to go and sponsor somebody to come in from another country, I literally can get 40 resumes in a week. And I know that because I've tried. And I've gotten, when I left it open to anybody applying, I would get 40, 50 resumes in a week, most of whom were qualified. When I do it here, I get, one every few weeks, and I'll get more resumes, but the rest are not suitable for what we do.
All right. So I want to change gears just a little bit because you mentioned like America's going to have to change and blah, 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 blah. Let's talk American pride for a hot second and recognize that within this past week, we had a successful fucking exchange of power. And by successful, I mean a tantruming baby, a tantruming, petulant child left, and a wave of adult hit the nation. All right. Because, I mean, if we got through this conversation without mentioning this, I think my head would explode.
Well,
Yeah.
so is it you wanted to talk about just where we are as a country, or just the fact that there's been the transfer of power? I mean,
What is this? How does this feel to everybody? That's what I want to know. I mean, I have a zillion fucking thoughts. I mean, I'll start real quick. We have press conferences every day, every weekday. And I think on Saturdays. How?
Yep, I know.
Yay! How great is that again?
Oh, we have a president who actually listens to the security briefings every day.
Oh, and can read.
Well, and I mean, actually, just to get onto the press briefings for a minute, because those were always really important to me for a number of reasons that people also don't think about. I mean, aside from the fact that it's important to have people who are keeping a close eye on the president, and that he has a voice that he can project out to immediately, and it's really important for keeping in touch with and understanding what the administration is doing. When 9/11 happened, everybody in the press pool already has security clearance to go everywhere the president can. So when Bush was moved to the top secret bunker, they didn't have to vet anybody else for the press pool to go with him. So the press pool could be in there. They already have a set of established procedures. So what could happen is Times could call up their reporter and say, hey, listen, is Bush still alive? He could say yes, and they can say, okay, we have certified, validated from one of our reporters, he's still alive. Where is he? Can't tell you, because I have security clearance and I know what I can and can't tell you, but I can tell you he's alive, everybody's safe. And then the Times can report national crisis, everybody's terrified, president is alive, he is safe, and they know that for a fact because they have a reporter with him. But they can't add that after the fact. They can't, once it's secured, it takes forever to get a security clearance. The press pool already has that. So that is one of the many advantages to having a press pool that travels with the president the entire time. And if there's a crisis, if there's an emergency, we have that ability to still talk to the head of the country, which we really lost, except for Twitter, because that's how you release national security policy.
Yeah, I'm curious I want to get a Sinister Porpoise in a discussion with her journalistic background.
Ooh, yeah.
Stuff like that. You know what I mean? Just to get a little inside baseball from her perspective.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We'll have to chat with her. So, but as to your larger point on sort of the chain, the people really underestimate the importance of the press pool. And when we lost that, it was like, holy do you have any idea what just happened? And that's the first thing. And we've been covering on In Time the arc of how to establish a dictatorship, and we've been using Pinochet as the example. Like, okay, this is when he got rid of the press. This is when he started throwing bags over people's heads and kidnapping them, like Trump's been doing. This is how this all works. And we're going to do overtime tonight. One of the things we're going to cover is it looks like he was about to replace his attorney general, acting attorney general, with somebody else in order to try to overthrow the Georgia results.
Georgia.
And it's like, it's holy smoke. And to have, honestly, I'd have been happy with, and I've always said this, I'd have been much happier even with Pence, who, despite being, I think, just probably a Christian Zionist, which is dangerous. We've had Christian Zionists before; they're dangerous. That's how the Gulf War started. The second one,
but they're predictably dangerous.
Yeah,
Right.
and they still follow the rules. They still follow the rules. And this is great because I did a stream about 2 months ago with somebody where they said, no, Pence is worse than Trump. I was like, no, because Pence is still inside the system. Trump is destroying the system. Very big difference. I said, when push comes to shove, Pence will follow the system. Like, nope, not going to happen. And then I was actually kind of proud. I was proud of Pence. Of all people, I was proud of Pence when the people on Trump's campaign tried to get him the extra power to overthrow the election, and he filed a motion or filed a brief against that lawsuit, saying no, don't ever give the president, the vice president, this power. I don't want it. No vice president should. I was like, that's a guy who understands the system. I dislike all of his beliefs, but he believes in the system, and that's the one thing that we needed.
Exactly, and I said the same thing for years because a lot of people, way back when Trump was first doing things that he should have been impeached for, and there were people on the left of the side of the fence saying, "Oh, Pence is worse." I'm like, well, here's the thing: all the bigoted, homophobic, transphobic, misogynist, racist stuff that Pence would have done, Trump did for him anyway. So it's not like we would have had, and plus the fact that Pence never had a cult following him that would do whatever he wanted. So right off the bat, so yes, he would want to do all sorts of heinous shit, but he wouldn't have a cult following him. This idea that Pence would have worse, he might even want to do worse things because we know Trump has no ideological center. He just did so. They just put stuff in front of him. He just did it.
Yeah, yep. Well, it's nice to feel just with Pence. I started to feel like some appreciation for our government again. It was like, okay, there are rules. He's following them, and then now with Biden in, I think Vox keeps saying this, and I think it's important to remember, which is yes, he's not going to be some super president. I think he's going to still be better than average. I think he's not going to be Jimmy Carter. I think he's just by what I'm seeing right now, he hit the ground running, and he's serious.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, Maya said in the chat, they want to see what he'll do in their over lip service, and I agree. But the thing is that, he's already, like you said, he hit the ground running. He's doing stuff, and what's bothering me, when I see people who are on the left side of the fence or more to the left than I am. And it's not even most of them. It's a minority, but they're kind of the people on the fringe, and they're going apoplectic because he didn't do this one thing or that one thing. I'm like, Jesus Christ, the guy just got there, Plus, some of the things that they're asking for are things he can't do under law. They're basically things that require.
Hold on a second. Well, I want to, which somehow I think it's my role sometimes in conversations. I want to forge the middle path between what you guys are saying because. Nick, I don't think it's as shiny, good, happy, positive as you're fucking pointing it out to be. And Joe, I don't think it's as and Joe, I think that you also have a good point that it's never going to be as good as the activists want it to be. And I think the bottom line is let's wait. It's only been.
God, Mowdy.
Hold on one second.
God,
because
let's be reasonable.
Nick, I'm about to pull your point apart. So this has teeth to it. So that was just my opening.
Mowdy teeth. Yeah. Hold on. Let me get my scared face on.
Better watch that shit. So the fact that these fiat executive order pageantry bullshit things were retracted by more pageantry bullshit, like non-important waves of a pen. You know what I mean? One form of nonsense
absolutely unimportant.
was erased by another form of fucking nonsense. I
wouldn't say they're unimportant. The fact that they can be erased by a next president if the next president doesn't agree with them, but they're not to say that the other ones were unimportant or the new ones are unimportant. I think is incorrect. The thing is, though, is that now again, one thing I did see people that were complaining. They're like, well, they thought like with a stroke of a pen he could give us Medicare for all. Well, no, he can't. That's taking Congress. And as I always tell people, Well, if you want that, then you need to contact your representatives. Call your House representative, call your senator, write to them, email them, snail mail them, do every form of communication and rub that shit in. But I had there's this guy Jack. He spells it like Geahk. I don't know if you know him. I forget his last name, but he's on YouTube. He's a YouTuber. He's a good guy, but. I even got him to admit that when Obama got elected, a lot of progressives basically said, okay, well, we got hope and change. And so they just sat back and didn't do anything. And it's like, well,
yes.
But that's not how it works. You don't just elect somebody and then your job is done. That's not the end of the story. And I'm like, I've been livid for a long time, but especially of late, there's this idea that it's like, well, okay, well, Biden's in there. What's he going to do? No, that's the first step. If you want something, you have to work for it, at least certainly politically. And what's going to take not only getting on his case, but also getting on your representatives' cases and say, I want this. Because that was part of the reason why we didn't get a public option when Obama was president, because basically the right wingers all call, because they do this all the time. They called their House representatives, they called their senators, they did all the things and said, no. And then our side didn't write and say, yes. And so these guys, they're craven. They just want to get reelected. So they the most of the people that are writing in are against it. So I'm not going to stick my neck out and support it because I'll lose the election next time.
Snail mail. You hit the nail on the head. By the way, don't email them. Don't call. Sort of. Snail mail is 10 times more effective than a call.
Yes.
Send snail mail. It's 10 times more.
And I know younger people say, "Oh, well, that's archaic," right? But that's how the system works. That the people, I mean, you can't yell about them being boomers and then send them your version of communication. You got to use their version of communication.
Well, it's not just that's their version of communication, but I mean, I've had members of family who have worked at high levels, high level staff for. In fact, my sister was. Oh my God. A press secretary for Congressman Helen Chenoweth. So, so one of the things is snail mail means you took the time to write it. They know you could have, but what it tells them is you wanted to be taken seriously. You wanted to be taken professional. Listen, somebody on Twitter was issuing complaints about yada yada. Oh, I sent an email. Did you? I was like, no. If I'm going to actually send something, I'm going to use my letterhead. I have letterhead. I'm going to write it out by hand, and I'm going to since I'm dyslexic, as I actually have to type it out, then I have to spell check everything to print it. But it gets people's attention, and right. It's absolutely. But you would also, please.
My way is to do all three, and actually go one further for your House representative. Schedule a meeting because they do hold hours in their local offices. Find out where your representative's local office is in your area and schedule an appointment. They will accept your appointment most likely, unless you don't curse or nasty when you set it up, but they will.
Well, for the most part, they're expected to as well. But I wanted to actually, just because this bridges a point that I thought was interesting, was about that cynicism and getting back to the coal mining jobs, which coal is dead. The only reason it's still going is because it's been artificially inflated by politicians who know that they have a huge untapped voter resource. If they lie and say we can bring it, which is what Trump was like, oh, we'll bring it back. You can't bring it back. It's not doable, and not in a truly.
You misunderstand. You misunderstand. Trump was talking about clean coal. You take the coal, you clean it. You clean it.
It's just like the rakes in the forest.
And then you're boosting palm olive. I mean, imagine how much more palm olive gets purchased because people have to clean the coal.
Dawn.
Dawn
has the corner market on degreasing.
Oh yeah, because it takes grease right out of your. I'm really sad that it's programmed so badly that I know that Jesus. It works. It works.
Off time has been brought to you.
I need to contact Mountain Dew and be like, hey guys, you know how much free press you've been getting from me? I'm expecting.
You're soaking in it.
Well, and to your point about the coal jobs I can't remember where I saw it, but I saw it somewhere that in Trump's 4 years, the 60,000 jobs that were there when he started, it's now half that. So for all his talk of of saving coal, and there were actually some miners that were feeling betrayed by him because like, oh, he said he was going to save the jobs, and half the jobs went away anyway.
Yep. And the reality is he slowed down the hemorrhaging a bit, but that he didn't do anybody any favors that way. He didn't do anybody any favors that way. He just didn't. I know why it sounds like he did in short term. It may feel like he did to a few people, but the reality is, but he knew what he was talking about, and that's slowing down the hemorrhage. That he's doing detriment. He's saving, or he's not saving. He's helping out a very small portion of our population to the detriment of everybody else, including that original portion over a long enough time scale.
Well, especially since he had, it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to subsidize and try to keep people, in their job and, as long as possible. But the other element to that would then be retraining whoever's retrainable to other jobs and help them move on to other jobs. But they didn't do any of that.
But that's the nimble part, that I was kind of trying to address, where it's like it's so baked into generations of families that we are a coal family or whatever. You can substitute coal with a couple other industries, right? It makes it way more difficult because like transitioning, it's not just like, oh, okay, yeah, I need to kind of be pragmatic and rise to the challenge. It's like what was the word? Oh man, there was a certain phrase I wanted to use. They're invested in it, right? It's like anything that you're invested in. When you identify as a coal family, that takes a little bit more convincing and compelling to nudge them off that center towards getting skills for another form of industry.
Well, and that's why one big mistake that Hillary Clinton made in 2016 election, when she kind of almost bragged about killing coal. Yes. It was an enormous mistake because here's this. It is so stupid about it because the leftist way is and should have been presented as, no matter what we do, coal's going to go away. And that's hard, and it's going to hurt a lot of families, and people are going to be out of work. But we're the party that cares about workers, and we care about labor, and we're going to put the programs in so that whoever can be retrained can move off to the others. So this way, as jobs go away, the people who aren't able to transition, at least they'll be the ones holding on to the jobs that remain while they're there, and through attrition, eventually those jobs will go away. But we're the ones who care about that. We're the ones who are going to do something about it because the other side doesn't.
Well, that's where social services come in, and I to make a quick jump to UBI, which Marty wanted to do a show on, and we haven't done in a while. I want to get caught and do another show on it because one of the things about a UBI, it's reasonably expensive. I think a UBI $1,000 a year to everybody is $5 trillion, but you get back $3 trillion in the increase in GDP. So you're only a net down $2 trillion, which is less than we've actually put on any of our stimulus things, and people aren't living a base the 1,000 UBI. But here's the other thing: nobody proposes like when the universal is misleading, right? Because there's no monetary theorists that support universal basic income that would give it to everyone. Right, it's always going to be a means-tested thing, right? So it would be significantly less than that $5 trillion price tag. It would actually only be about $2.5 trillion.
Okay, I'm glad. Thank you, Vox. I'm glad you told me that because I have to say that's one of my big reasons for being against UBI is that because I've done that same math and I was like, this makes no sense. I mean, as it is, my wife and I, we just got our stimulus checks, $1,200 for between the two of us. We don't need $1,200. We don't. I mean, we actually, the only reason why we made the means test is last year was an off year business wise, but we don't need $1,200. I mean, it's nice. Yeah,
the reason that the means test is higher than most people think about, right? Because when you really think about, we made $175,000 a year last year. We don't need any money. Well, if you're living in Georgia or Texas or Kansas, that's true. But if you're living in Philadelphia or Los Angeles or Washington, D.C. or parts of New York, right, it could be very much the case that you make $175,000 a year and you're barely getting by.
Oh, I know.
So That's why, like, when people look at these means tests and they say, why is it so high? And that's kind of going away because, our population is continuing to concentrate in these urban centers, right? Look, $1 million does not spend the way it used to even 10 years ago, right?
Jesus,
so,
so one of the things is, so first of all, somebody's saying, I think I said 1K a year, and I meant 1K a month. But keep in mind that's 1K a month without having to pay anything, without having to work or do anything like that. But if you do something like that, then people can spend more time retraining for a job that's going to get them more money because they don't necessarily have to make the essentials, presumably in 1K, but nowadays probably isn't even close to enough for that. But if you do that and reduce or remove other social programs that could cover for instead, then what you have is people who can sit there and retrain for jobs because they don't have to actually worry about the absolute bare essentials getting handled. The one reason people don't have time off, if you're stuck as a waitress and you're barely making enough money to survive, and you're working double shifts, you're working at night all the time, you're exhausted, you can't go to school and you can't learn something else. And it behooves all of us. GDP goes up if you get a better job or a better educator, even just doing that job better. Everything, it again raises all boats. So you end up with the UBI or any system like that, where we're at least finding a way to help people so that it can't fall through certain cracks. It actually has a significant net boost over time on the entire economy. So it behooves everybody to do it.
Here's my question though. If we actually had a living wage, would we need UBI?
That's Vox would certainly have I'll let Vox answer, then I've got a thought on it.
So the UBI is just an attempt to bring everybody up to a living wage, right? That's basically what it's there for. The idea is that you provide people with this money, and you have to do other things in order to prevent obviously the living wage from going up. But that's one of the important parts of the universal basic income, is to provide everybody, with the ability to live, the ability to, breathe. Generally, there are two proposals that go together, right? So generally, we have two proposals on the MMT side that we talk about. We talk about universal basic income as like think about the universal basic income as a diving board, right? So it springs you, right? But the pool is the federal jobs guarantee, right? And so when we talk about, where we would like to move things, we're going to talk about having the universal basic income as well as a federal jobs guarantee, so that such that anybody who wants a job has a job, right? Universal employment. And of course, Keynesians will say, oh my God, no, we have to have unemployment people. No, we don't. No, we don't. We only have to have the capacity to shift labor, right? And so what a federal jobs guarantee does is something effective. The government is just holding people, right? They're paying you for, you might not even be doing anything, right? You just might be getting a paycheck. But once the private industry says we need more people, then the government basically sells their commodity, their number of employed people, to the private sector to do these jobs. So, there's been this myth amongst Keynesian economists that we need a certain amount of unemployment in order to have a stable economy. And no, that's just absolutely false. It's a myth that's been propagated by really, really bad economists, all the way down, right? Even in Alan Greenspan, who's it's just really destructive. Reaganomics and Keynesian economics is just really destructive.
Yeah, Alan Greenspan was a bit more of a neoliberal economist.
Economist.
I think it was more Austrian school, but I will say this: I don't think a UBI is going to cause inflation. So because you're still not actually adding any money into the you're not printing currency. So I don't think UBI by itself isn't going to change how much money you need. I think that's a myth. So if everybody started getting $1,000 a month, that doesn't mean that the cost of fruit or vegetables is going to go up. In fact, it may go down because people will be more able to pay for them. But at any rate, that aside,
there would probably less waste.
I'd like to talk about what I think is possibly the most important, the single most important thing that Joe Biden has done to date in the executive orders, and not a lot of people have
3
really,
days.
yeah, in the last 3 days.
Well, I want to say one quick thing about the UBI. So
Yeah, go ahead.
So the first point on the UBI is it's not going to cause inflation, so it's not going to cause price changes. That's a misconception about what giving everyone 1,000 would do. It won't affect the economy that way. But the second thing is, if you a minimum wage, a living wage guarantee, I'd strongly disagree with, because I do think what it's going to do is it's not going to improve. Businesses are still only going to have a set amount of income, so they're going to have to take that money from somewhere, and I think it offloads that burden to businesses. You're going to see a lot of businesses going under, and you're going to see an increase in unemployment if you have a minimum wage guarantee from the business.
That just doesn't bear out.
No. Plus, as a business owner, I completely disagree, because basically what you're talking about is like, it's the business owners. Basically the middle class pays much of the taxes, right?
Yep.
I mean, and then that's where a lot of the businesses are. We know most of the businesses are actually small businesses. So whether you take it from me in taxes or whether you take it from me in wages, it doesn't make a difference. So yes, I will have. So what ends up happening is that I would rather personally, as far as the minimum wage goes, I would rather pay the workers. Where in fact I do. I mean, no one in my company makes less than $13.50 an hour. So basically, it's only one person, and so basically, I'm working my way toward the $15 hour. And actually, most people in the company make over 20. In fact, some of them will make $40 or $50 an hour.
Yeah, the average wage, and like raising the minimum wage, right? And first of all, let's just dispel some things here, okay? Franklin Roosevelt did not create a minimum wage. Franklin Roosevelt created a minimum living wage, or a living minimum wage. That's what he created, right? The only thing that Roosevelt didn't think of was tying it to inflation, right? Now, because this has become a political football, the minimum wage hasn't gone up, right? Based on inflation, the minimum wage should be $20.38 an hour, right? That is under what the average what the average is across the board in the average wage of the American citizen, which is like $27.38 or something like that, right? So it's still below the average wage to begin with, and $15 is way below that. And most people make like 90% of Americans make above $15 an hour, right? So bringing 10% of people up a couple bucks, and most people are employed in small businesses, but small business is a misnomer as well, because we have this idea when we think of small business, we think of 3 or 4 people, in an ice cream shop or something like that. No, the average small business has between 200 to 800 employees. That's the average size of a small business in America. Mom and pop shops are not the average small business. And there is no there's no historical anything to show that when you raise the minimum wage, unemployment goes up. It does not bear out in any statistics that we have collected since minimum wage became a thing.
Well, so if you have a small business and you're paying people $15 an hour, and then the next year it's mandated that you pay them $22 an hour, and you have 1,000 employees. I haven't done the math. I don't know where are you going to get that extra money to pay them, and it doesn't come out of your tax. You may not have to pay taxes on that money, but that the the difference between the taxes you would have paid and the income that you're taking that you still have to go forward is still going to be minus whatever the tax percentage is. So where
Sure,
does that money come
your
from?
overhead is absolutely going to go up, right? But all that means is your profit margin is going to go slightly down, right?
Well,
And
what if your margin is thin? Most businesses, in order to stay nimble, have reasonably thin margins, especially small businesses.
Yeah, I would say though, if you have 1,000 employees, then yeah, at that point, your margins are probably not that slim. You as the business owner are taking home a substantial amount of money. So now
they're not going to. But isn't there still a calculation? I'm not saying they're going to lay off the equivalent amount. I'm not saying that all of that's going to come in layoffs. Some of it's going to come from their profits. They're going to find a balance, right? They're going to say, okay, what's the way that I can still make this business as efficient as possible? Some of it's going to be layoffs. Some of it's going to be cutting costs in other ways. Some of it's going to be made up in taxes. And then you do all of those things, right? Including lay some people off.
It's never wages that kill a business, right? We just need to dispel this myth, right? Wages never are the reason that businesses fail. Businesses fail because of what's known as the fraud triangle, right? Fraud is what generally kills business. And this includes employee theft, mismanagement of funds, and bad investments, right? That is what takes down 90 to 95% of small businesses. It's never wages. In fact, wages are part of the smallest amount of a small business's overhead. What is the majority of the overhead is going to be insurance, bonding, supplies, and their own internal infrastructure, right? That's the big chunk of a business's overhead.
That's true for retail businesses. For a business like mine, where we're an engineering firm, labor is most of what we do. We make very little money on hardware that we sell when we resell. So for us, we were actually selling hours. But now the thing is, like, okay, last year I actually had a down year when business was off because of COVID, and it's the first year ever that I made a loss. But the thing, and part basically, and I still would have had a potentially positive year, but I had 2 employees that vastly underperformed, and when that's like a quarter of my work staff, that hurt. So business was down, and then I had people that basically, I don't know, I wouldn't count that as wage theft, but they certainly didn't come close to performing what they should have performed. Somebody went over,
Sure.
somebody went over when like
yeah, mind you, I'm talking about the means here, right? I'm always whenever we talk about economics, we're always talking about the average, right? Because there's always going to be you're an exception to the rule, right?
But I understand that. To make it clear that like what you're talking applies particularly in a where you're selling a product as opposed to where you're a service oriented. I don't think most service oriented industries are going to be on a more similar model to mine. That's the only thing I want to point out.
And of course, so the simple answer here, Nick, is that it's the increase is just passed on to the consumer, right?
Well,
it's the way it is.
That gets to the other. Well, that kind of gets to the other point. But I mean, there's a state of equilibrium. Some of it gets passed on to the consumer. That's true, but it gets distributed depending on the business in whichever way it seems difficult for me to accept that you could increase overhead in any way, any kind of overhead, and that at least one possible, depending on how much the overhead is and depending on the structure of that in a particular business, you're not going to have some layoffs. And if you increase the overhead to every single business in the country, it seems to me that some of them are
but again, we're only talking about. I mean, we're talking about fast food employees, waitresses at Applebee's, like bare minimum intro level construction jobs, right? We're talking about 10% of the working population of America would see an increase in their wages from a increase in the minimum wage, right? We're not talking about a large number of people here.
But my
Right.
my only point is why a UBI is preferable to a living wage. So he had said, why not do a living wage? And so I was trying to answer why a UBI where you're not going to suffer any of those consequences would be preferable to a living wage increase, which would also influence. And that was my other point, was it's going to also cause an inflation in the prices. So you then have to raise it again until you reach an equilibrium state. But that
Well,
Yeah.
but the thing too, because one though, if you remember, anytime there's a minimum wage increase, it's always phased in. So, especially when anytime there's a big jump, it's always phased in. So it's not like you're going to have to suddenly grab it all on 1 year.
Oh, yeah.
So also remember, in the case of a minimum wage, so if you talk about the minimum wage going up right now, basically right now because it's what, 765. So you're talking about what, roughly doubling. So it's like, so if you think about it, that's $15,000 a year. That would actually pay people more than a UBI would, and so that would actually grow the economy more. It actually puts more money into the consumers' hands. So there's actually more money to spend on the now slightly increased cost of the goods. But there was somebody who had looked at like Papa John's workforce. And they did the math, and they said that basically if they went to $15 an hour, it would have raised the cost of pizza 11 cents per large pie. I mean, I think
these are never going to be, and I know the study you're talking about, right? And these things are never big, right? You could see an increase to the tune of maybe not 1 to not 1%. Right, which is gonna equal about that, about like for a $20 purchase, right, across the board, you might see an increase of 10 cents, right, 5 to 10 cents, which is not really noticeable, right? And you're not going to see it on the wholesale end. You're only going to see it on the retail end.
Why aren't you going to see it on the wholesale end?
Because the wholesale end, right, a lot of that stuff is just done through tax write-offs and things like that anyway. So there's just no point in raising it on the wholesale end.
Also, here's the other thing you got to remember too, is that basically right now our products are artificially depressed in price on the backs of people who are being exploited. So that to me, there's also a moral component. It's just like when we talk about like in the not fast food, but like restaurants, the minimum wage is even lower. It's like $4.13 an hour they can pay people that are workers. So, and I've heard people say, oh well, if you raise the minimum wage and pay them $15 an hour, now the cost of the food's going to go up. I'm like, yeah, but not really, because if you think about it, when I was a kid, the typical tip was 10%. Then it was 15%, and then 18%. Now it's 20%. This is an artificial. We're artificially subsidizing the businesses because they've chosen not to give their workers more money. That now we're expected to pony up more as a tip to make up for what they're not getting in their wages. But if they were getting more in their wages, we wouldn't need to tip 20% because they'd actually be getting a reasonable wage. Now, I don't agree with places that they have a living wage and then they deny you the right to tip. Like, bullshit. If I want to give the person extra money, that's my fucking money. That's my decision. Hey, this person did a good job. Here's a tip. I'm still going to do that. But that's the thing. So we're living on the profits of crime to pull a line from Black Sabbath. That's basically everything. Just like gasoline. Gasoline in this country is artificially low because of the way everything gets financed. But if we actually did things properly, we would be paying the same price or close to what they pay in Europe.
All right. So Vox, what was it you wanted to talk Biden? Or what the administration did.
Well, yeah. So if we can just switch here real quick, I'd like to talk about the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, which is a very, very little known office in the White House, and it is known as the OIRA, right? And what the OIRA does is it looks at cost analysis of regulations and can basically neuter the efficacy of new regulations, right? And so the OIRA has been fairly conservative run ever since the time of Ronald Reagan. Biden has issued an executive order that has basically directed the OIRA to go to looking at the societal benefit of regulations as opposed to the monetary consideration of regulations, which is what it's done for the last 40 years. So how this plays out, right? The memo issued was called Modernizing Regulatory Review, right? And so basically what this does is, let's think of a new regulation that comes along that says, you know, we have to regulate the amount of mercury found in salmon, okay? And you can only sell salmon that contains not 2 decimals milligrams per deciliter of mercury per pound of fish. Right now, what the old OIRA would do is they'd say, okay, how much is that going to cost the salmon industry, right, to meet that regulation? And they'd say, okay, well, if it's within this area, they'd approve the regulation. If it was over, what they would do is they would maybe add an addendum that says, but, you know, you can have it higher if this, or lower if that, in order to bring down the cost, right? So this has been done to a lot of regulations that have basically started out as good regulations that have been gutted by this little known agency. Because what the agency has never done is, over the last 40 years at least, is considered what is the net social positive for people, right? Does it benefit the well-being of people? And of course the answer is, of course, yes. When you limit the amount of mercury that people consume, right, that has a social impact, right, regardless of how much it costs. So the Biden administration has said any new regulation that comes up must be viewed not in a how much is it going to cost to implement, or how much is it going to cost over 10 years, yada, 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 but looked at in terms of, does this regulation impact positively the well-being of the American people? That's huge. That is gigantic. That is possibly the single most important executive order that Biden issued, mask mandates and things like that. I can't think of a more broadly impactful executive order that has been issued in 20 years. So that's something that happened. And
nice catch. Yeah.
Well, and in that regard, you know, one of the things that always bothered me about the way we had been doing it up till now, beyond, you know, obviously the fact that we were ignoring the social impact and only looking at business, and it's like everything has to, you know, was looking at what's the impact on business and not the rest of us. But the other thing that it was doing was it was also ignoring the cost that was being imposed on us by having, you know, not example, too much mercury in the fish.
Yes.
That has deleterious effects on us and on the economy
down the road,
because it costs us in health, it costs us in all sorts of things. And so, as an engineer, you know, when you evaluate these things, you're supposed to look at all the impacts, not just a narrow focus, because you have to look at, in our case, it's a cost of ownership. So we're doing this, and it costs this much to operate this now. If we do this, we spend this money up front, and it has a deleterious effect in the short term. But hey, it has a long-term effect that saves us in other ways. So then you say, okay, well, the cost over 10 years is actually better to make this change. And certainly the societal impact is absolutely important, especially when you are talking about how much we allow companies to poison us, basically.
And of course, to add a little bit to that, right? Well, just to tie this conversation in with the conversation that we just left, right? We talk about from an MMT's perspective, right? I look at anything that the government does in terms of inflation. That's all I care about. I don't care how much money you want to spend. I could care less how big the deficit. I mean, I really could. I could care less if you came to me tomorrow and said, "Cat, I want to spend $100 trillion." Okay, go spend $100 trillion. The only thing that I care about is how much does it increase inflation, right? So when we look at things in terms of, is this going to increase inflation, which would be a negative inflationary expenditure? Is it going to be cause deflation, which would be a positive inflationary expenditure, or is it going to be inflationary neutral, which would just be inflationary neutral, right? And so what we always want to do is we want to make sure that the amount of money that the government is spending, that the spending that will cause inflation, and to give you an idea of spending that will cause inflation is pork. Pork causes inflation, right? Giving a congressman $1 million to build a spam museum, right?
Literally, pork.
Yeah.
Or the Ark. What's
Yeah,
the
or
name?
the Ark or something like that, right? So
What
that's
a big no.
that's inflationary negative spending, because what that does, right, is that you've made an investment that you will never get back, right? It costs the American taxpayer money, right? So that has to be offset with inflationary positive spending, which is deflationary spending. Now, what is deflationary spending? Deflationary spending is spending that the government does where we will get a return on our investment, right? So that is going to be anytime we build a hospital, we get a return on our investment. Anytime we build a school, we get a return on our investment. Of course, people see, like, they say, oh, well, we're going to spend $27 million to build a new high school. And people go, oh my God, how can we? You will get the $27 million back. It'll take 20 years, but you'll get it back. And then once you've gotten that back, then the rest is all profit, right? And of course, it's very difficult to measure that, right? Because you're talking about giving somebody an education and looking at how it increases GDP spending and all that other stuff, right? But you can boil this down to very, very basic mathematical formulas, right? So when we look at these regulations, right, we say, okay, well, we can say that it would cost the fish industry $5 billion to implement this mercury change, and people say, oh, that's just too much, that'll sink the fishing industry, right? What they don't tell you is that it will save the American people $30 billion over the next, say, 30 years in healthcare related expenditures due to the high mercury content. So yeah, it's going to cost the fishing industry a little bit of money, right? They say, oh, you're going to put fishes out of business. Well, no, we're not, right? Because we subsidize fishes, right?
Yep.
We'll just continue to give them, we will subsidize them until we have reached that point where we have reached inflationary neutral status and we're moving to inflationary positive status, and then the subsidy ends. And of course, this is very difficult to fit on a bumper sticker, right? But
Yeah.
this is the kind of shift that progressives have been waiting for, right? Because progressives have been saying for a long time, look, you don't understand economics, or you do, but you don't care, and you don't understand the way in which money works and inflation works, or you do and you don't care, right? And so when I see something like this, I see the nod. I see Biden doing something that is extremely progressive. Now, to lead this, of course, now, to leave the thing out, right, is to say that this is a cabinet confirmable position to lead this department. So we still don't have a nominee yet for this thing, right, to lead it. So it's going to be interesting to see who Biden appoints. So I'll be watching, obviously, this particularly the OEIE very, very carefully, and so will progressives, right? Because the thing we care about the most right now, right, is equality and equity. To bring it all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, right? Back Ted Cruz. Equality and equity. That's what we care about, right? We want equality of opportunity and we want equity of outcome, right? Because, you get the people that run around and say, oh, well, you don't want equality of opportunity, you want equality of outcome. No, 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 no. I don't want equality of outcome, right? Equality of outcome will happen all on its own, so long as we have equity of outcome, which is the recognition that simply because you are alive, you are entitled, if you will, to certain things: clean water, clean air, clean food, shelter, clothing. You are entitled to these things. In the 21st century in America, you are entitled to these things.
Right.
And we can afford to do it. And in fact, now, of course, modern monetary theory is a developing, economic system, and it's often combined with other things because it deals with only certain aspects of the economy. But on a conservative side, right, implementing the majority of policies that MMT's theorists want implemented, like myself, Bill Mitchell, Stephanie Kelton, would actually end up causing the deficit to just drop. I mean, just drastically drop, which then, of course, leads to its own problems, right? Because we know when we drop the deficit, what do we get? Recessions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we have to have the federal jobs guarantee in there to prevent recessions, right? So, yeah.
I was just going to say real quick, going to your point about the positive inflation versus negative inflation, that's kind of what I was talking about with the with the water. What do we do with our water system? That whether do we buy bottled water, which has a huge cost, both direct and indirect, versus replacing the pipe and has an upfront cost, but basically a long-term benefit. And long-term, not only does it save us actual money out of pocket over time, but it also reduces all the detrimental effects of using so much plastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I tell you, one of the things that just side tangent, right? One of the things that just really just irritates me about consumerism, capitalism, the whole nine things, and like environmentalism. So, what is fast becoming the most ubiquitous man-made object that does not decompose found in landfills? Anybody know?
Straws, I think.
K-cups.
Oh,
K-cups?
yeah.
Keurig cups. The little things that you stick in your new cup.
Oh, yeah, no.
The amount of plastic waste over the last 5 years that has been created through the throwing or the tossing of these Keurig cups. It's replaced plastic spoons is the most ubiquitous man-made object that does not decompose, found in landfills. It's just insane, the amount. And of course, the sad thing is that almost everything that we make out of plastic, plastic is a amazing substance. And without plastic, we would not be able to have the society that we have today, right? We're always going to need plastic. But almost everything that we use plastic for can be made out of non-plastic, biodegradable materials. Your milk jug can be made out of biodegradable materials. Paper, paper, right? Is it's a tree, right? And of course, if we got our heads out of our ass about the impact of hemp and things like that, right? We don't ever have to chop down another fucking tree, ever, to make paper, because we have this thing called hemp, and the amount of material you can get out of an acre of hemp, which, by the way, regrows every year, so you can harvest it every year.
It's a weed.
Right?
It's a weed. It's one of the most useful things on the planet. It's a weed. You can't stop it from growing.
The amount of fiber for paper, or the amount of pulp that you get out of 1 acre of regrowable hemp, compared to an acre of trees, is something like to the magnitude of 6.
Wow.
Right? You get 6 times the amount of fiber from hemp. You turn it into paper, and then when you ditch it, it goes into a landfill. What does it turn into? Compost.
Right.
Because it's paper. Because it's made out of a tree. right? We don't have to cut down these trees anymore. Now, of course, and of course, I say, well, Kat, well, what about lumber and things? Aha, right? Now, yeah, turning building materials, right? What do we do with all the plastic that's laying around, right? What can we turn that into? Walls. We can build walls out of recycled plastic.
Well, and that's actually some point I was going to make. Now, there's actually two different categories of plastics. There's thermoplasts and thermosets. Trying to remember which one was recyclable. Thermoplasts are not recyclable. Thermosets are. So what we want to also do then is remove away from the non-recyclable types of plastic wherever possible.
Is the thermoplast, is that the kind of plastic that, like, if you leave it out in the sun, it just like turn? But see, that doesn't. But see, turning into small specks of plastic, right, doesn't mean that it's biodegradable.
No, it's not biodegradable, and it's also not, like I said, not recyclable. So you couldn't turn them into houses. Basically, if you heat it up, it basically just it melts and gets all nasty. But so what the thing to do then is to say, okay, what thermoplast are we using that we could replace with thermosets or non-plastic material, so that this way, if we are using plastic, we're using recyclable plastics, and then we have to, enforce it. Plus, like in the 90s, the problem was happening was we had a big push there was an environmental push in the late 80s, early 90s, and a lot of municipalities started collecting material for recycling, but what they didn't do is they did not increase the number of recycling centers. So they were collecting material and there was no place to put it. So then literally half of the stuff that was collected for recycling got landfilled anyway, because there was no place to do it, because no one was willing to do that positive inflation spending to build more recycling centers.
Yeah, and then of course they made it illegal to pick up cans and things like that, which basically was the only job that homeless people had, right? And like the amount of sheer stupidity on all sides is just mind-blowing. But anyway,
it's the get voted in at any cost. It's what we were talking about with the miners too. They're lying about the mining jobs because they know that that's how they're going to get elected, despite the fact that what they're doing hurts everybody just so they can get into office.
Well, also I think a lot of
it is real quick just for me. It's 5, so I'm going to have to say goodbye to everybody.
I'm going to need to get going
audience.
too. I'm actually going to need to get going too. So let's.
I will. As serious, it was wonderful to talk to you, Nick, and audience. I will see you tonight. By the way, if you're still here and you're listening to us right now, go ahead, smash that subscribe button and smash that like button, right? Because it really helps the channel out, right?
Before we go, can you drop your YouTube channel link in the chat?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, I got to put those into the
all right.
Yeah, sometime when you have time, there's some things I wanted to make videos about that go into economics, but I'm not an economist, so I would love your feedback and to say that's right or that's wrong or that's stupid or whatever.
Sure, absolutely. All right, we will see you guys in a little bit.
Thanks. Take care.
All right, night all. Thank you. Bye.